April 7, 2003, downtown Baghdad. Captain Kim "Killer Chick" Campbell banks her A-10 Thunderbolt II through the smoke-filled sky. At 28 years old, she's one of only 50 female fighter pilots in the entire United States Air Force. Her call sign was earned through precision strikes against Taliban positions in Afghanistan. Today's mission began as a routine strike against Iraqi command vehicles, but as Campbell and her flight leader, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Bino Turner, approached their target, the radio crackled with an urgent call. American soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division were pinned down near a strategic bridge, taking heavy fire from Republican Guard forces. "We need immediate air support. Danger close. Our guys are getting hammered." Campbell and Turner banked toward the coordinates. Below them, American armored vehicles were stopped short of the bridge, unable to advance under withering enemy fire. This was exactly what the Warthog was built for. Campbell dove first, her A-10 screaming downward. She lined up her gun run, the GAU-8 Avenger spinning up to fire. The 7-barrel cannon unleashed controlled lightning, depleted uranium rounds tearing through the Iraqi position like paper. Concrete barriers disintegrated. Turner followed with rockets exploding against secondary targets. Together, they systematically dismantled the enemy stronghold. But as Campbell pulled up from her final attack, climbing away from the devastated target, the entire city erupted around her. Anti-aircraft fire opened up from hidden positions. From somewhere below, a surface-to-air missile launcher acquired its target. The explosion was catastrophic. The surface-to-air missile detonated against the right horizontal stabilizer with devastating effect. Both hydraulic systems were severed instantly. The stabilizer had a football-sized hole blown clean through it. Hundreds of shrapnel holes peppered the aft fuselage. Oil streamed from the damaged right engine. Campbell felt the aircraft shudder and roll violently left. The stick went dead. No response. Nothing. The A-10 pointed nose down toward Baghdad and began an uncontrolled dive. 8,000 feet, 7,000, 6,000. "Yard 02, you're hit. Pull up." Turner's voice crackled over the radio, but Campbell couldn't pull up. The aircraft was falling like a brick, completely unresponsive. Warning systems screamed, "Hydraulics! Flight controls!" This was every pilot's nightmare, total loss of control over enemy territory. Campbell had 30 seconds before impact. She could eject, but that meant parachuting into downtown Baghdad with zero survival prospects. Campbell's training kicked in. She ran through emergency procedures at lightning speed. Backup hydraulics, nothing. Emergency pumps, nothing. Manual flight switching, still nothing. 5,000 feet, 4,000, 3,000. Then she remembered something from training. Manual reversion. The aircraft's most primitive backup system, practiced exactly once. Most pilots never used it. Campbell reached for the manual reversion switch. Manual reversion in the A-10 is like stepping back in time to the Wright brothers era. When every modern flight control system fails, this 19th-century backup takes over. It's nothing more than a series of cables, pulleys, and push-pull rods connected directly to the flight control surfaces. No hydraulic boost, no power assistance, no computerized help. Just raw mechanical advantage between the pilot's muscles and the aircraft's control surfaces. The system was designed by engineers who understood that the A-10 would be operating in the most hostile environments on Earth, where sophisticated systems could be destroyed by battle damage. But they also knew that manual reversion demanded exceptional piloting skills. A 1982 Air Force study concluded that the pilot workload in manual mode was unacceptable for most landing situations. When Campbell flipped the manual reversion switch, she felt the aircraft shudder as the mechanical systems engaged. Suddenly, the stick had weight again, enormous weight. It was like trying to steer a truck with no power steering while wearing oven mitts, but it was responding. With her arms straining against the primitive controls, Campbell pulled back on the stick. The A-10's nose came up slowly, reluctantly. The altimeter needle slowed its descent, stopped, and began climbing. At just 2,000 feet above Baghdad, she had pulled out of the dive. Turner's voice crackled over the radio. "Outstanding! Yard 02, you've got it back. Climb, climb." But Campbell's ordeal was just beginning. Manual reversion meant she was now flying a 20,000-pound aircraft using cable controls designed for emergency use only. Every movement required tremendous physical effort. The damaged tail surfaces created asymmetric lift, causing the aircraft to constantly want to roll left. Campbell had to fight it continuously, her muscles already burning from the strain. Turner slid his A-10 alongside for a damage assessment. What he saw made his stomach drop. The right horizontal stabilizer looked like it had been hit with a giant shotgun blast. The hole was so large he could see daylight through it. Shrapnel damage covered the entire tail section like acne scars. Oil was streaming from the right engine, and chunks of metal were missing from critical flight surfaces. Yard 02, you've got significant battle damage, Turner reported, keeping his voice calm and professional. Large hole in your right stabilizer, multiple impacts throughout the tail section. Can you maintain control? Campbell gritted her teeth as she wrestled with the controls. I've got it. It's flying. Barely, but it's flying. Now came the next challenge, getting home. Al Jaber Air Base was nearly 300 miles away across hostile territory. Campbell would have to fly this crippled aircraft for over an hour, maintaining control through pure muscle power, while Iraqi anti-aircraft batteries took shots at her whenever possible. The manual reversion system wasn't designed for extended use. The cables and pulleys could snap under continuous stress. The push-pull rods could bind or break, and Campbell's arms were already aching from the constant effort required to keep the aircraft level. But the Warthog was living up to its reputation for toughness. Despite hundreds of holes and massive structural damage, the engines were running smoothly. The aircraft was maintaining airspeed, and most importantly, it was responding to her control inputs, however sluggishly. Turner took over all radio communications, declaring an emergency and requesting priority handling for their flight. He also began talking Campbell through emergency checklists, preparing for what everyone knew would be an extremely dangerous landing attempt. Yard 02, we're going to work through this together, Turner radioed. I'll handle all the talking. You just focus on flying that aircraft. For the next hour, Campbell fought a continuous battle against physics and fatigue. The A-10 wanted to roll left due to the asymmetric damage. It wanted to pitch up because of the destroyed stabilizer. It wanted to yaw unpredictably as airflow separated around the damaged surfaces. Campbell countered every tendency through brute force, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature at altitude. Iraqi gunners on the ground occasionally opened fire at the slow-moving formation, but Turner's presence discouraged most attacks. The two A-10s maintained a steady course southward, leaving the chaos of Baghdad behind as they crossed into the empty desert between Iraq and Kuwait. As they crossed into Kuwaiti airspace, Al Jaber Air Base appeared on the horizon like a mirage. Campbell could see the distinctive pattern of runways and taxiways, but she also noticed something else. Emergency vehicles were already lining the runway. Word of her situation had preceded them. Fire trucks, ambulances, and crash recovery equipment were positioned at intervals along the flight path. A search and rescue helicopter circled overhead, ready to respond if Campbell had to eject during the approach. The base had essentially shut down all other operations to focus on bringing home one badly damaged A-10. Turner contacted the tower. Al Jaber Tower, this is Dodge Flight. Yard 02 is inbound manual reversion with significant battle damage. Request priority handling and crash equipment standing by. Dodge Flight, Al Jaber Tower. Understand manual reversion landing. Runway 26 is cleared and standing by. All emergency equipment is in position. Wind is calm. Campbell began her approach to the runway, but immediately discovered that landing in manual reversion was infinitely more difficult than just flying straight and level. Without hydraulic assistance, she had no speed brakes to control her descent rate. She had no wheel brakes to stop after landing. She had no nose wheel steering to maintain directional control on the ground. The approach had to be perfect on the first try. Too high, and she would float past the runway with no way to stop. Too low, and she would hit the ground short of the threshold. Too fast, and she would roll off the far end. Too slow, and she would stall and crash short of the runway. Campbell lined up on final approach, her arms trembling with fatigue after more than an hour of constant muscle tension. The A-10 wanted to sink rapidly without power assistance to the flight controls. She fought to maintain the proper glide path, making constant corrections with the primitive cable system. "Looking good, Yard 02, Turner called. "You're on glide path, power looks good." The runway threshold passed beneath her. Campbell began her flare, pulling back on the stick with everything she had left. The main landing gear touched down with a solid thump that she felt through the entire airframe. The aircraft bounced once, settled, then began rolling down the runway at 130 knots with no way to stop. Campbell deployed the drag chute and brought the throttles to idle. The parachute billowed behind the aircraft, providing some deceleration, but not enough. She was still traveling over 100 knots with 3,000 feet of runway remaining. Using differential engine power and carefully applied rudder inputs, Campbell managed to keep the aircraft roughly centered on the runway as it gradually slowed. The distance markers flashed past. 2,000 feet remaining, 1,000 feet, 500 feet. Finally, with just a few hundred feet of runway left, the A-10 rolled to a complete stop. Campbell sat in the cockpit for a moment, hardly believing what had just happened. She had landed an unflyable airplane using 19th-century technology. She was alive. Turner's A-10 touched down behind her and taxied alongside. Through her canopy, she could see him giving her a thumbs up and a huge grin. Ground crews were already running toward her aircraft, fire extinguishers at the ready in case of fuel leaks or electrical fires. As Campbell shut down the engines and opened her canopy, the magnitude of what she had accomplished began to sink in. She had flown a critically damaged aircraft 300 miles over hostile territory using cable controls that belonged in a museum. She had executed a perfect landing under impossible conditions. She had cheated death in the most spectacular way imaginable. The post-flight inspection revealed damage that should have been unsurvivable. Maintenance crews counted over 400 individual holes in the aircraft's skin. The right horizontal stabilizer was destroyed, not just damaged, but completely destroyed. Large sections were missing entirely. Both hydraulic systems were obliterated. One engine had sustained serious internal damage and was leaking fluids from multiple locations. Chief Master Sergeant Tony Martinez, the senior maintenance supervisor, shook his head as he examined the wreckage. "I don't know how this thing stayed in the air," he told reporters. "By all rights, it should have broken up in flight. The fact that Captain Campbell not only kept it flying but landed it safely is nothing short of miraculous." Lieutenant Colonel Mike Millen, who witnessed the landing, was even more direct. "Kim landed that jet with no hydraulics better than I land the A-10 every day, with all systems operational. The aircraft, tail number 810987, would never fly again. The damage was so extensive that repair was deemed economically impossible. Instead, the Air Force decided to preserve it as a testament to both the A-10's legendary toughness and Campbell's extraordinary airmanship. But Kim Campbell's war wasn't over. The next morning, she was back in the cockpit flying a search and rescue mission over Baghdad. Another A-10 pilot had been shot down, and Campbell volunteered to help find him. Because that's what A-10 pilots do, they take care of their own. "I never really had time to think about the fact that I was going back to Baghdad, where just the day before I had escaped a possible shoot-down," Campbell later recalled. "In my mind, the only thing that I could think about was that I had a job to do. I knew that the search and rescue alert crews were there for me the day before, and I was going to do the same for this pilot." For her actions on April 7, 2003, Captain Campbell was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the military's highest honors for heroism in aerial combat. The citation read, "Captain Campbell's extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight and her devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, the 332nd Air Expeditionary Wing, and the United States Air Force." General Richard Myers, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, took personal note of the achievement. "She's one of the few pilots who ever landed the A-10 in the manual mode. A lot of people think that it's not even worth trying." Campbell went on to complete multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, accumulating 375 combat flying hours across 100 combat missions. She rose through the ranks to become a full colonel, commanding air expeditionary groups and mentoring the next generation of fighter pilots at the Air Force Academy. Her damaged A-10 was transported to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina, where it remains on permanent display. The aircraft is mounted in a climbing attitude, nose pointed skyward, as if frozen at the moment it pulled out of that fatal dive over Baghdad. A plaque nearby tells the story of April 7, 2003, when one pilot proved that skill, determination, and sheer guts could overcome impossible odds. Today, Kim Campbell's story is still told in A-10 squadrons around the world. New pilots see photos of her battle-damaged aircraft during their initial training, long before they ever fly the Warthog themselves. It serves as both inspiration and reassurance, proof that the A-10 can bring you home even when everything goes wrong, as long as you have the skill and courage to fly it. While it hasn't changed tactics, one active-duty A-10 pilot explained, it does give every Warthog driver confidence in the jet. In all my time in combat, I've never once worried that the A-10 wouldn't bring me home. April 7, 2003 was supposed to be just another close air support mission over Baghdad. Instead, it became the day Captain Kim "Killer Chick" Campbell proved that sometimes, when all the technology fails, when all the systems break, when death seems certain, sometimes the pilot makes all the difference. The day she flew an unflyable airplane home.